Okay, so having successfully modeled this in 3D, you want to also draw it in isometric using the given dimensions. Okay, so we can open a new drawing file, and then the usual stuff that we would do. So limit, if you want to. Okay, but the most important thing you want to do here is you want to switch from this planar view in orthographic. You want to switch from here to isometric drafting. So you would come here and then turn isometric drafting on like that. Now in here there's an arrow by it. When you click on the arrow, you see that you have the three isometric planes. Now in any case, if you don't have isometric drafting on the status bar, you'd have to go to customization and then seek out isometric drafting, which should be here. So if it's unchecked, obviously it wouldn't be on the status bar, but then you click on it to check it, and then it appears on the status bar, and then we can use it. You make sure you turn it on here on the status bar. And as we draw, we would have to be switching in between the ISO left, the ISO top, and then the ISO right, dependent on which plane we are working in. So you'll see that in effect as we go along. So perhaps we can start looking at the artifact that's given to us. I think it's prudent that we can start in the ISO right. So let me select ISO plane right, which is this one right here. Then we would obviously draw with lines, but let's go to layers, and then in here a mechanical layer manager. Let's click to open that, and what I want to do is I want to increase the line thickness to 0.3, and then I would okay that, and then turn on line width like that. Okay, so we can now proceed by clicking on line. So I'll click on line, and then okay, so let's say I want to start at some position, maybe here. So let's start maybe at some position here. I'm just going with the coordinates that's given to me. That's about 180 and then 60. All right, so a random position like that, which is fine. And then I will turn on the ortho mode so that I am constrained to the 30 degrees required for isometric drawing. Now I'm drawing from the front view. Okay, so we look at that, and that distance that I'm looking for here would be 80, and then I can move up by a distance of 70, and then I can now come this way. The distance there is 20, and I would go down by 50, and then I can track these points and then connect. Okay, so I have this face in. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this face to the left and position that's basically the width here. So that distance there on the side view should be 60. So what I mean by that is I'm going to select all of these, and then I'll copy. So CO for copy. Then for base point, I'll select this point, but I want to move not in this plane. I want to move in the left plane. So I'll click on this arrow and then select ISO left so that I can move like that. And I want to move by a distance of what? of 60, which is basically what the width of the block is. Now I can go for line, and then I can make connections here, right? So at the bottom, I would have line. Now this distance here, there is a groove that goes through, so that distance there ought to be 15, and then I would move up by a distance of 10, and then I would have 30 here, 30, and then I can track these points, so from here to there, like that. So continue with those lines. I can connect this to that, hit escape, start the line tool again, and connect this to that. Then obviously I would have to delete this and that. So select them both and then hit delete, and then line, I would have to connect this to that. Okay, so what I can do next is to draw the square prism that is protruding from this surface here. So I can go for line, and then I think I would have to switch to say ISO, right? Okay, so I want to start here. I want to track that point, and I track it down by a distance of 10, and then I want to move let me go back to ISO left. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I would have to, looking at the dimensions, I can, on my left I would have 15, right, and then I would have 30 here, and then 30 there, and that should be 30 as well. Then connect this to that. So I'll switch back to ISO right, and then L, enter for line, and this distance here should be 40, so 40, and then down by 30. Okay, so I would have to switch to be able to continue. So let me switch to ISO left, and then I can come, this distance here should be 30, and then I can connect this to that, and then line. Now I can connect this. Okay, so for that I would have to switch to ISO right, okay, and that distance should be 40. Okay, and then I connect to the bottom, hit escape, line again, and then okay, so having gotten this, I think I can select this line there and that one as well, and hit delete on the keyboard to remove them, and then TR for trim. So I can trim this portion, that portion, and finally this one. And I think what I would have, so finally L, enter, and then line. So from here, let's zoom in a little bit, right? So let it go beyond, it's fine, and then TR, and then I can trim this portion. Okay, so this basically would be, the solution required of us if you want to draw that in isometric. Fairly simple.